So, Rick, there is this one thing that everybody talks about, but I don't think everybody really understands it. Very little understand it, very few do it well. And I'm talking about brand voice.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have been talking about it lately because it's becoming more and more important. So, today we want to dissect what brand voice is, how to develop the brand voice style for your brand or for your company, things to avoid, and how why brand voice is so important, right? So that's, I think, a very important topic, and sometimes it doesn't get enough attention. And in this world where everybody's creating a bunch of content and it's getting harder and harder to distinguish, and the search bar is changing, I think this is a very relevant topic. So Rick today is generously walking us through the process of
It's brand voice day.
developing your brand voice. So let's start with, like, why is brand voice so important, Rick? What are your thoughts there, and why our listeners should care about this?
Okay. Well, I think there's a number of things that are critical when it comes to brand voice. Um, Having a defined brand voice means you have consistency across all your different content channels, whether it's your social, your own channels, your website, your blog articles, your ad copy. There should be consistency there, and in gaining that consistency, you build a brand identity that your readers, your audience can relate to. Hopefully, if you're doing it well. And when your audience can relate to your brand identity, you form an emotional connection. So that emotional connection is what fosters loyalty. And there's one thing as a former writer that I would do, and I know a lot of writers do this, and I feel like it's also a big part of the average person when they're researching, right? So as a writer, we do a lot of research, right? We're on different sites, we're reading articles, and every once in a while the way content is presented on one website just resonates with you. And as you continue your research, you end up on other sites and you realize it isn't speaking to me like that other article. And you end up back on that site just to research there because of the way they present information. That happens too with consumers, with your prospects that are out there researching services, researching products. They're on multiple websites. And when they find one that voice they have, the way they are speaking to them through their content resonates, they tend to stick around and do more of their research there on that site. And you are building a bit of a trust with them through that. So having a brand voice is great just for the psychology of sales part, but also it helps to distinguish your content from your competitors. You don't want that bland, nothing voice that is similar to 90% of the content that's out there right now. You want to stand out a little bit. So it is a good way to differentiate yourself. And in doing so, it encourages the types of behaviors from readers that search engines like to see and reward with better rankings. So that was my long answer to the importance of brand voice.
So I love a couple things that you mentioned, Rick. One is the emotional connection part, because that helps you generate trust, and again, of course, that connection. And two, a lot of content out there tastes like chicken. It's
I
so
like
watered
chicken.
down. I like chicken too, but sometimes it's pretty bland. And if everything tastes like chicken, everything tastes the same. So, um, but where I'm going with this is that it's so watered down with corporate jargon and kind of business like speak or speech that or talk, like it just loses all of its flavor, right? So, and I think one of the things is that a lot of people is afraid of having a very distinct voice.
It's hard.
Sometimes you have, yeah, it's hard, and sometimes you have to please the marketers, you have to please the lawyers, you have to please the HR people, like now, and everything comes out very, very watered down. But anyway, so I don't want to go into a rant about not having a good brand voice, but then let's talk about how can you develop one. If you are a brand out there or an agency helping a brand, what should be the process of developing your brand voice? What are the elements? What are things to think about?
Well, at a really high level, you have to start with your audience. Um, who are they? What resonates with them? What emotions are they feeling when they come to your site? What are they? What are you solving for them? Like, you've got to figure out who your audience is, because you talk to different people in different ways. So narrowing down who your audience with is a big part of developing your brand voice. Once you know who they are, you know their demographics, you know their sociographics, you know how they view you in the market, why they would come to your site, what problems they're trying to solve. Then you take a look at your business. You have presumably a set of core values. You have a mission. You have a vision. So you want to take a look at those things and say, who are we? You can start to assign, like we could, Carlos, look at our core values and start to assign personality traits to them, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so we develop this list of personality traits for our business, and we develop this list of things about our client, our ideal client base, um, and what would resonate with them, and we look for intersections, and we let that form the basis of our brand voice. From there, we start to scope out documentation. Now, let me give you a quick tip on this documentation, because this is one thing I see all the time. Voice, if it's anything that's more than a sentence and 6 adjectives describing voice, it is rarely written as direction to a writer. And that's all it needs to be, is for your writers. And oftentimes these are written to the stakeholders. It's written to the people who need to approve what the brand voice is going to be, which makes it not so useful for your writers. So keep that in mind when you start to scope out this document. Write it for your writers, not for your stakeholders. Um, so you've understood your audience, you've defined your kind of your brand identity through your core values, your mission. You found those intersecting points. Now you want to create that voice guide. So start by listing out your values, list out your mission, include your personas, the audience personas. Either you've already had them or you developed them during this process. The writer should know this stuff, so get those in there. When you start to break down the actual voice, you get into what I call a resonation chart. This is a table that has things like engagement style, content tone, content depth, actionable insights, data, fact versus opinion, and in it include information on what within each of those attributes or things, items, what would resonate with your audience. So you're not really describing voice here, but you're describing how you believe your audience would react to these types of things being presented in a certain way. So Joe Smith, your persona, when it comes to data, this is how he likes his data. So these are things that resonate. This helps your writer, because voice is more than just the words. It's the context of the message. It's how it's presented, right? So I would develop that resonation chart. Then I would go into just 1 or 2 paragraphs about the voice itself. Describe your voice, 1 to 2 paragraphs. Here's where you can throw out all the adjectives, and we're going to talk about those adjectives in a couple minutes, Carlos. But just take 1 or 2 paragraphs, describe the voice. Then go into another table, or it could be bullet points, but I like to see it as a table. But this is your voice guidelines. Here's where you're going to describe things such as tone to your writer. You're going to describe personality inspirations is another good one to help them kind of visualize or audiolize. I don't know, to hear a voice in their head that is a
We
target
make
for
up
what you're
words
going for,
here. We make up
right?
words here.
Yeah. So maybe we've used Morgan Freeman and Robert Downey Jr. several times in this example, but if you feel that there's a celebrity or a historical figure or well-known personality who encompasses your brand voice, explain it to the writer here in this table in one of the rows there. Use of specific language styles, attribute weighting. This is a good one because chances are you get 7, 8, 9 adjectives in those 1 or 2 paragraphs you wrote for voice. Weight them. Which one should come through the strongest? Because if you're trying to capture 7 different, like personality adjectives, in your writing, it's going to be a muddled mess. So do your weighting. This is first and foremost. We come through as authentic first. There's some humor mixed in, but we're not aiming to write humorous copy. If there's an opportunity for a little wit or a pun, great. So kind of explain that through the voice guidelines chart. And once you've done with that, you want to move into do's and don'ts. This is examples of language and tone that both fit and don't fit the brand voice that you're envisioning. As you write out each one, explain why it fits or doesn't fit, and make each set the same subject matter. So whatever the example is going to be, write it correctly. This is on brand for our voice. Here's saying the same thing that's off brand and why. Okay, so don't just do a bunch of random, these are on brand, and a bunch of random, these are off brand. Group them together. Here's thing A done correctly and why it's done correctly, what we like about it, what part of the voice it captures. Here's thing B or thing A done incorrectly, and here's why we feel it's incorrect or off brand. So do a whole list of those. And then you need a list to cover terminology. As an example, Carlos, we would say that we prefer the term creators instead of freelancers when we're talking about our writers. That's just brand specific. That's how we are going to approach it. That needs to be put in this list of preferred terminology. So there'll be terms to use, terms not to use, any context that needs to be around that should be in there. And then guidelines, writing style guidelines. There's some overlap here with a style guide. So if you have an in-depth style guide, you may not need to go too in-depth into the writing style guidelines. But here's where you should address things like the usage of rhetorical questions, reading grade level, sentence paragraph length, how to approach CTAs, because voice is probably going to get a little salesy there. So let's take a minute to describe that part. Your thoughts on active voice and things along those lines. So the first table is kind of high level, but this one is more granular. And again, it does overlap with the style guide. So if you follow that process, and now that I think about it, I'm just throwing a whole bunch out there. I'm going to put this out in writing for you guys.
Yeah, you need to put a guide.
Yeah, I'm going to put a
Yeah,
guide
we need to put a
together
guide
that has
together.
all of this
'Cause
stuff and maybe even a template for you to
this
use.
is a
But
lot.
we've had good luck with this, and it is writer facing. Equipped with this, your writers will do just so much better. And here, we're encouraging you to create unique voices. The problem in that is it's really hard now to find writers who can hit unique voices. The reason we have so much bland content out there is because that's kind of everybody's default voice, right? Some writers are versatile, but all writers have a default voice. And the more unique a voice is, the harder it is to find writers who can hit it naturally, can hit it organically, who aren't forcing it. So you need to equip versatile writers with this type of information. It sounds like a lot of information because it is a lot of information, but they need it to be able to be on brand with the content they're writing for you.
Yeah, and I think a huge part, what I've learned about this process is creating examples of what represents the representative or your voice or the representative of being off voice. So because this is such a hard to articulate and make super crisp topic, right? Sometimes you can articulate it, but how people understand it might, how people interpret it might be a little bit different. So putting examples is great to help refine. And I don't know how many people are doing that. We do that when we develop voice brand or brand voice guides for our clients, but I don't know if people are doing that outside. Like they probably put in all the other things, right? These are the objectives, these are do's and don'ts, but maybe they're not putting the examples. So don't sleep on the examples in your brand guideline, because that's the easiest way for people to really capture what you're trying to articulate. So I like to drive that point home, and we definitely need to come up with a guide so people can
Yeah.
follow the different steps.
But let's take
So
that a step
okay,
further, though, Carlos. because examples, they're kind of a double-edged sword, right? So you include them and you include the whys and the why nots. But the problem with these small samples is that they're usually dripping with your voice. Um, and that can lead a writer to write an entire piece and they're trying to get your voice into every sentence. And voice is like, it's like a seasoning, you know,
Mm.
it's what is that? Salt Bay, right?
So
You
big.
only need a little bit to get there. But if your writer is trying to infuse voice in every sentence they write, it overdoes it. It's way too much salt on the steak. Um, so you also want to include a long form example. So give them those little bits. Here's voice, here's why it's on brand, here's why it's not. But then give them a longer sample to show how prevalent the voice is throughout the copy, because it only takes a little bit. A lot of what your content should be is pretty straightforward. You know, it's not dripping with voice. Voice comes through at a larger scale. It is emergent from an entire piece of content, even though it's not present in every sentence. So giving them that longer form piece kind of calibrates them to how heavy to go on your voice, how frequently to make sure they're getting an element in there that is on voice for you.
Okay. Yeah, great point. So why don't we go into what are some of the common pitfalls that people, fall into when trying to develop their voice?
Okay, well, I'll start with one. They're inconsistent with it, not just on their own website, but across all channels. So you put a lot of work into brand voice, you share it with writers, your blog is suddenly, spot on, but it doesn't align with your site copy. It doesn't align with your social media. How often have you seen a website, Carlos, that has that just everyday bland copy, but their social media is just like cracking everybody up, full of wit. Like there's a disconnect there. Which you'd think, well, having a really good social media person is wonderful, and it is. But the problem is, you now have a disconnect in your voice. So you start to lose that authenticity. This is Acme brand social, but it's not the same as what Acme brand's presenting on their website. So you start to get that it dilutes your brand identity. So make sure you're consistent. If you're going to develop a brand voice and it's unique, be consistent in using it in different places. You can have tone that adjusts your brand voice slightly, depending on the channel or even the content type. If you have a lot of humor in your brand voice, maybe you don't want that in your white papers, or well, maybe you do, or in your case studies, or in certain service pages, or here or there. So use tone to make adjustments for the different channels, but be consistent. Um, Overuse of jargon is another one, or not addressing how to use industry speak in your brand voice guide is a big problem. Uh, you have to take into account who your audience is and how much they would understand about what you understand clearly. And you and your coworkers, you're in the industry, you know things. Carlos, you and I use terminology all day that might not hit home when we're talking to even other marketers who aren't purely
Yep.
focused on content marketing. So make sure that your content or your voice directs your writers to the level of jargon that would work for your audience. And some audiences need that jargon, but many do not. Ignoring the audience is another one that kind of feeds into that. So developing your brand voice just based on your view of your business, who you are collectively as a company. You might have a great voice. It might be spot on for what you see in the day to day, but it may not resonate whatsoever with your audience. And if that's the case, you're in trouble. If you don't make that connection with your audience, you're going to have a hard time converting or building an audience, getting that loyalty from people. So it's got to be that intersection of both who you are, who your audience is, and what resonates with them, and find where those intersections are. Um, what else? You know what? I want to get into this, Carlos. Adjectives. There is a
Yeah, that
gross.
was gonna be my next question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I know we're running a little long, and I want to get into this. So there is a gross over reliance on adjectives when it comes to voice, and more specifically, um, vague, overused adjectives. I bet you could name a few right now, Carlos.
What do you mean professional and casual is not clear enough?
I think that might be
If
number
we had
two and
if we
three
had a
on my
dime
list. Yeah.
if we have a dime for if we had a dime for every time that a company tells us I want it to be professional and casual, we would be multimillionaires
Yeah.
just based out of that because that's probably the most overused voice adjectives that I've seen. But yeah, go on. That's this is actually pretty funny.
Here's the thing, right? I could go and I could find 20 pieces of content that qualify as being casual and professional or authoritative and professional, and they will have 20 different voices. It's too high level, it's too vague. A writer can't do much with that. You need more powerful adjectives or more specific adjectives I'll give you some examples. Authoritative, we hear that all the time, but do you mean authoritative as in scholarly, like we know what we're talking about because we're the experts in this? Do you mean it as commanding, because that's a big difference between
Yeah,
scholarly and commanding, where commanding is there's that confidence, that oomph behind it, almost like alpha content, right? But both are authoritative or authoritative. With casual, are you talking conversational or are you talking playful? Or is it even as far as to say unscripted? Is professional formal or is it corporate? There's a difference
yeah,
between those two. And
yeah.
giving those words to a writer will make a difference in what they produce. So take a look at your brand voice right now. And if it says, we're trustworthy and friendly, but authoritative, you need to do some work. That's not enough for a writer to really say, I understand what your voice is. That is a recipe to bland content that reads just like 90% of the content that's out there. It's too vague. Put better adjectives to it. You can use AI for help here. Find content that you think captures what you mean, put it in and ask it for the attributes, and tell it. It's pretty intuitive. Tell it. I think this is authoritative content, but I need better descriptors to show a writer how I believe this is authoritative, and it will give you better terms to use. Give you descriptors to use. I think I've got some examples here, Carlos, of um, like authoritative versus commanding. This is pretty good. So you could describe your voice as our authoritative content ensures readers get the best advice. Or you could say our commanding content cuts through the noise with clear, decisive advice that positions us as a leader in our field. I can do more with that second one. I understand that
Yeah.
as a writer better. I'm coming at you with confident, you know, this is what I'm telling you to do, because I know best. That is commanding authoritative, and that is better direction for a writer. It may not be your voice, but it's better than just saying authoritative content. So please, please, please take a look. Be careful with your adjectives. Pick the right ones. Use AI to help you narrow it down and go with examples. That's my rant on
Yeah.
adjectives today.
Well, there you have it, folks. Like, how of course we can stay here hours and hours digging into this topic, but we just wanted to give you at least a good overview of how to do, how to think about it. Please don't sleep on your brand voice style guide. Spend the time developing it and be extremely clear and be very deliberate about what you want to get out of it. Right. Again, we see the mistake many people go right into production. They start at the end. They start writing at the blog phase, at the article phase, instead of doing the strategy. And part of the strategy is the brand voice, is guidelines. So it's very important, especially nowadays when it's so hard to stand out. So, and I've said it many times, it's not that people have like short attention span. It's just there's too much content, and a lot of it is not great. So if you want to create capture attention. You just got to create great content that is engaging, and the brand voice is going to be a big part of it. So thank you again for listening, and we're going to develop some guides for you. Just it's not just our voices and our pretty faces. I mean Rick's pretty face and my ugly face. But yeah, thank you folks for listening, and until the next one.
Thank you, everyone.